Picture this. A woman standing alone on a sidewalk outside a Korean BBQ restaurant, her rolling suitcase beside her, the glow of neon signs reflecting off the wet pavement. Inside, through the steamed-up windows, 6 people sit frozen at a table. A check rests in front of a young man whose face has gone from smug satisfaction to complete bewilderment in the span of 30 seconds. The number on that check? $200. He thought he could humiliate me over 3 pieces of chicken. He didn't realize I'd leave him with a $200 bill and zero dignity in front of his entire family. But to understand how we got here, to this moment of perfect calculated justice, we need to rewind 7 days. She was 23 years old, and this was supposed to be a romantic milestone, a week-long visit to her boyfriend's home state, meeting the family, seeing where he grew up. The kind of trip that's supposed to bring couples closer, to test whether the relationship has real roots or just shallow Instagram appeal. From the moment she stepped off the plane, something felt off. Not catastrophically wrong. Not red flag waving in your face obvious, just off. Like a photograph hanging slightly crooked on a wall. You might not notice it immediately, but once you do, you can't unsee it. Her boyfriend, let's call him Marcus, was different here. Back home in their college town, he was charming, attentive, the kind of guy who remembered your coffee order and texted you good morning without fail. But here, in his childhood home, surrounded by his mother, his 2 brothers, his sister, and his aunt, he transformed into someone else entirely. He became smaller somehow, despite being physically the same. He spoke differently, his voice taking on a whiny quality when addressing his mother, a boastful edge when talking to his brothers. He name-dropped his modest salary like it was 6 figures. He brought up his entry-level management position at a mid-tier retail company as if he'd just been appointed CEO of Amazon. His family ate it up. They treated him like a golden child who could do no wrong. Every mundane observation he made was met with enthusiastic agreement. Every mediocre joke earned belly laughs. She watched this performance for 6 days, smiling politely, nodding along, feeling increasingly like a prop in someone else's one-man show. But what bothered her most were the small controlling behaviors that emerged when his family wasn't watching. The way he'd steer her away from conversations with his sister, as if afraid they might compare notes. The dismissive comments about her outfit choices, delivered with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The way he'd answer questions directed at her, cutting her off mid-sentence to clarify what she really meant. By day 7, her final day before flying home, she was exhausted. Not from sightseeing or meeting new people, from performing, from shrinking herself to fit the shape he needed her to be in front of his family. But what she didn't know yet was that the final performance was about to begin. It was around noon when Marcus made the announcement. They were sitting in his mother's living room, surrounded by family, when he clapped his hands together like a kindergarten teacher gathering children for story time. But he wanted to take everyone out to dinner, his treat, to celebrate her visit and to say goodbye properly. The family erupted in approval. His mother touched her chest in that performative way people do when they want to appear moved. His brothers exchanged approving glances. Finally, little Marcus was showing some maturity, some generosity. His sister actually smiled at her for the first time all week, as if she'd somehow earned this meal by enduring 7 days of family dynamics. She felt a brief flush of warmth. Maybe she'd misjudged him. Maybe the weirdness of the week was just adjustment, him trying to balance his old life and his new one. This gesture seemed genuine, sweet even. But then came the details. Marcus had already chosen the restaurant, an all-you-can-eat Korean BBQ and sushi place about 20 minutes away. His absolute favorite spot, he explained, somewhere he'd been going since high school. The way he described it made it clear this dinner wasn't really about saying goodbye to her. It was about showcasing his favorite place, playing tour guide one final time, being the center of attention while generously footing the bill. She kept her smile fixed in place and mentioned casually that she wasn't a huge fan of red meat, that she typically stuck to chicken and seafood, that she didn't eat pork at all, a dietary preference she'd maintained for years. Marcus waved this away with the confidence of someone who'd never had his preferences questioned. The place had options for everyone, he assured her. There was chicken, there was shrimp. She'd find something. His tone wasn't unkind exactly, but it carried an unspoken message. Don't make this difficult. Don't be high maintenance. This dinner is happening my way. She nodded, said it sounded great, told herself she was being overly sensitive. What Marcus's girlfriend didn't realize was that she'd just agreed to a performance where every line had already been written, and she wasn't the star. The family spent the afternoon buzzing with excitement. His mother debated between two outfits, settling on the one Marcus complimented. His brothers talked about how much meat they planned to demolish. His sister asked if she should invite her boyfriend. Marcus said no, keep it family, and she accepted this without argument. Nobody asked what she wanted to eat. Nobody confirmed whether the restaurant choice worked for her. The dinner had been framed as a gesture of appreciation, but the planning process revealed the truth. This was Marcus's show, Marcus's restaurant, Marcus's family, and Marcus's rules. She was just the guest of honor in name only. The restaurant was exactly what he'd described. A sprawling, slightly chaotic Korean BBQ joint with built-in grills at every table, the air thick with smoke and sizzling meat, and shouted orders in Korean. Red vinyl booths, fluorescent lighting that made everyone look slightly jaundiced, K-pop blasting from overhead speakers at a volume that made conversation require mild shouting. Marcus walked in like a conquering hero returning to his homeland. He greeted the hostess by name, or at least he tried to, getting it slightly wrong, which the hostess politely didn't correct. He requested their biggest table with the enthusiasm of someone who'd been planning this moment all week. As they were seated, he launched into a detailed explanation of the restaurant system for anyone who'd listen. You pay a flat rate per person for all you can eat. You order from tablets at the table. You cook the meat yourself on the built-in grill. There's a time limit, 90 minutes, and crucially, there's a waste charge. If you order food you don't finish, they add extra fees to your bill. He delivered this information with the self-importance of someone revealing classified secrets, even though half his family had been here before, and the other half could read the laminated instruction card on the table. She watched him bask in the attention, watching his family settle into their seats, watching him position himself at the head of the table like a patriarch at Thanksgiving. He was 23 years old, barely a year out of college, working a job he'd complained about constantly when they were alone. But here, in this moment, surrounded by his family and his favorite restaurant and his girlfriend, who had no choice but to go along with everything, he was important. What none of them could see was the power dynamic being established right there at that smoky table, one where only Marcus's preferences mattered, and everyone else was expected to adapt or shut up. The menus came, or rather, the tablets came, slick digital interfaces with photos of marbled beef, glistening pork belly, thick-cut short ribs, pages and pages of meat options with a small separate section for vegetables, rice, and non-red meat proteins buried at the bottom. Marcus immediately took control of the ordering process, not in an obvious aggressive way. He didn't snatch the tablet from anyone's hands or bark orders. Instead, he leaned over, casually scrolling through options, making suggestions that sounded like questions but functioned as decisions. What if we started with the bulgogi? The pork belly here is insane. We should get 3 orders. They have this amazing short rib. Let's do that. Oh, and the spicy pork. That's a must. His family nodded along, murmuring agreement, letting him curate their experience. She sat quietly, watching the orders pile up. Beef, more beef. Pork in 4 different preparations: fatty cuts, lean cuts, marinated cuts, the kind of meat-heavy spread that made sense if everyone at the table was enthusiastically carnivorous. But she'd already told him she didn't eat pork. She'd mentioned preferring chicken and seafood. He didn't order any chicken. He didn't order any shrimp. When she gently reached for the tablet to add her own selections, he glanced at her with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes and said they should get the main stuff ordered first, then add extras. His mother backed him up. "Let Marcus handle it, sweetie. He knows what's good here." So she waited. The first round of meat arrived on small silver plates, mountains of pork belly glistening with fat, thick-cut beef short ribs that looked like they'd been engineered in a laboratory for maximum marbling, spicy pork bulgogi in a sauce so red it looked radioactive. Marcus began loading the grill with an almost religious fervor, arranging meat like Tetris pieces, explaining to nobody in particular the optimal cooking time for each cut. She cleared her throat and asked if she could order some chicken now. He waved her toward the tablet without looking away from the grill. She ordered chicken, plain grilled chicken, shrimp, a side of steamed rice, mixed vegetables, things she actually wanted to eat, things that wouldn't sit heavy in her stomach on the flight home tomorrow. When her food arrived, a modest collection of 3 chicken pieces, a small mound of shrimp, and vegetables. It looked almost comically restrained compared to the meat empire covering the rest of the table. But what Marcus's girlfriend didn't know yet was that her simple, considerate order would become the center of a humiliation she'd never forget. She ate her food slowly, methodically, but making sure to finish everything on her plate. The chicken was fine. The shrimp were slightly overcooked but edible. The vegetables were exactly what she needed. Something light, something that wouldn't make her feel overstuffed before a morning flight. Around her, Marcus's family was in full carnivore mode. His brothers were having some kind of unspoken competition to see who could eat more beef. His mother picked delicately at pork belly, commenting on the quality. His sister alternated between scrolling her phone and reaching for whatever was closest. And Marcus was in his element. He held court at that table like a conductor leading an orchestra, pointing out when meat needed flipping, explaining the difference between cuts, telling stories about previous visits to this restaurant. His voice carried that specific frequency of someone who's deeply insecure, but has found a temporary stage where he can pretend to be confident. Then he turned his attention to her. He speared a piece of beef with his chopsticks and held it across the table toward her. "Tried it," he insisted. "This one's perfect, just the right amount of char." She accepted it politely, took a small bite. It was fine. She told him it was good. He seemed satisfied. 5 minutes later, he did it again. Different cut of beef. Same performance. She ate it, trying to appear grateful, feeling the meat sit heavily in her stomach alongside the food she actually wanted. Then came the pork. He loaded his chopsticks with a piece of pork belly glistening with rendered fat and extended it toward her. "Try this one." She hesitated. She'd already told him she didn't eat pork, had told him before the restaurant, had mentioned it when they arrived. It wasn't an allergy or a religious restriction, just a personal preference she'd maintained for years. She didn't like the taste, didn't like how it made her feel. Simple as that. But now, with 6 pairs of eyes suddenly on her, with Marcus holding the chopsticks across the table, with his family going quiet in that specific way families do when they sense a tiny moment of tension, she felt the weight of expectation crushing down. He gave her a look. Not angry, not overtly aggressive, just stern, the kind of look a parent gives a child who's embarrassing them in public. A look that communicated very clearly. Don't make a scene. Don't be difficult. Just eat the fucking pork. She took the piece. She put it in her mouth. She chewed and swallowed while her stomach turned, and something inside her screamed that this was wrong, that nobody should feel forced to eat food they don't want. That this tiny moment was actually a massive violation dressed up as hospitality. The table resumed eating. Crisis averted. But Marcus wasn't done. 10 minutes later, as she sat quietly trying to let her food digest, he loaded up his chopsticks again, held out another piece of meat, told her it was chicken thigh, dark meat, really tender. She looked at it closely. It was pork. He was lying to her face, trying to trick her into eating more of something she'd explicitly said she didn't want, and doing it with a smile, as if this was playful, as if this was charming, as if she was the one being unreasonable. She said no, said she was full, said it firmly enough that he couldn't push back without looking like the controlling asshole he was actually being. His jaw tightened. The smile stayed on his face, but something behind his eyes shifted. She watched it happen in real time, the transition from playful boyfriend to something colder, something calculating. He set down his chopsticks and turned his attention back to his family, suddenly animated, suddenly loud, overcompensating for the tiny rejection he'd just experienced. And that's when she felt it. The atmosphere at the table changing, the temperature dropping, the sense that she'd just failed some test she didn't know she was taking. The rest of the meal crawled by in increasingly uncomfortable silence between the two of them. His family kept eating, kept talking, oblivious or choosing to be oblivious. Marcus performed enthusiasm, but wouldn't look at her, wouldn't speak to her. His body language screamed disappointment and anger, even as his mouth kept smiling for his family's benefit. She replayed the evening in her head. Had she been rude? Had she not expressed enough gratitude? Was she wrong to refuse food she didn't want? The self-doubt crept in like smoke under a door, filling her mind with questions, making her wonder if maybe she was the problem. They finished eating. The bill came. A check presenter thick with the damage of 6 people eating all you can eat for 90 minutes. Marcus grabbed it without ceremony, without the performative reluctance people usually show when picking up a large check. He glanced at the total, and she watched his jaw clench again, watched him swallow hard, watched him pull out his card and hand it to the server with the careful control of someone who's deeply angry but trying to hide it. $200, plus tip, it would be over $220. Nobody at the table mentioned the amount. His family thanked him profusely. His mother touched his arm. His brothers clapped him on the shoulder. His sister gave him a side hug. She thanked him too, her voice small, feeling like she'd somehow done something wrong without knowing what. But what she didn't realize yet was that Marcus had been running a calculation in his head for the last 30 minutes, and she was about to pay a price that had nothing to do with money. They left the restaurant, his family peeling off to their own cars, shouting goodbyes and promises to see each other soon. Marcus walked to his car in silence, his footsteps heavy, his breathing controlled. She followed, pulling her suitcase, feeling the weight of the unspoken accusation hanging between them. He unlocked the car. They got in. He started the engine. And then the real dinner began. The car was silent for exactly 45 seconds. She counted them in her head, watching the streetlights slide past the window, feeling the tension radiating off Marcus like heat from pavement in summer. His hands gripped the steering wheel at 10 and 2 with the kind of rigid control that suggested he was physically restraining himself from something worse. His family had already disappeared into their own vehicles. They were alone now. No audience. No need to maintain the performance. That's when he exploded. Not with volume. Marcus was too calculated for that, but with a kind of cold, controlled fury that's somehow worse than screaming. His voice was measured, each word landing like a carefully placed stone, building a wall of accusation between them. He'd spent $200 on that dinner. $200. Did she understand what that meant? Did she have any concept of how much money that was for someone at his salary level? He'd put that on his credit card, his credit card with the balance he'd been trying to pay down. And for what? He turned to look at her at a red light, and his eyes were cold, for her to eat 3 pieces of chicken. The way he said, 3 pieces of chicken made it sound like a moral failing, like she'd committed some unforgivable sin by ordering what she wanted and finishing it. His voice dripped with contempt, each word precisely chosen to cut. She'd barely touched the beef he'd offered her, took only the tiniest piece of pork after he'd practically begged her to try it, refused the second piece like he was trying to poison her, made him look cheap in front of his family. We made him look like the kind of boyfriend who couldn't even get his girlfriend to eat at his favorite restaurant. The accusations kept coming, building on each other, creating a narrative where he was the victim and she was the ungrateful princess who'd ruined his generous gesture. Did she know how embarrassing that was? Having his family see her pick at her food while everyone else enjoyed the meal? Having to explain to them later why his girlfriend apparently hated the place he'd chosen? Having them probably think he was dating someone high maintenance, someone difficult, someone who couldn't just be normal for one fucking dinner? She sat frozen in the passenger seat, her hands clasped in her lap, staring straight ahead as his words washed over her. Part of her brain was trying to process whether any of this was true, whether she had been ungrateful, whether she'd somehow violated an unspoken rule of relationship dynamics that everyone else understood but her. The self-doubt was like quicksand, pulling her down. Maybe she should have just eaten more of what he ordered. Maybe her dietary preferences were unreasonable. Maybe refusing that second piece of pork had been rude. Maybe the $200 bill really was partially her fault for not eating more, even though the math made no sense. Her portion of the meal couldn't have been more than $25 tops. Marcus continued his monologue, warming to his theme now, his voice taking on the rhythmic quality of someone who'd been rehearsing this speech in his head for the last 30 minutes. He talked about sacrifice, about how he'd been saving for a new laptop but spent that money on dinner instead, about how his family was important to him and he'd wanted to do something special, about how she'd made it weird. The word ungrateful came up 4 more times, so did embarrassing, and then he used the word that made something inside her finally crack: selfish. She was selfish for ordering only what she wanted, selfish for not participating more enthusiastically in his curated dining experience, selfish for making everything about her dietary preferences instead of just going with the flow, selfish for not considering how her choices would reflect on him. But as Marcus's voice droned on, listing her failures with the systematic precision of a prosecutor, something shifted in her mind. It started as a quiet voice in the back of her head. Wait. Then it grew louder. Wait a minute. She replayed the evening frame by frame, but this time without the filter of self-doubt, without the automatic assumption that she must have done something wrong. He'd chosen the restaurant. She hadn't asked to go there, hadn't requested Korean BBQ, hadn't suggested an all-you-can-eat place where the bill would inevitably spiral based on how much the group ordered. He'd made that choice unilaterally, framing it as a generous gift while never once asking what she might actually enjoy on her last night in town. He'd invited 6 people without consulting her: his mother, his siblings, his aunt, a guest list that inflated the bill from a reasonable dinner for 2 into a $200 plus family feast. She hadn't asked him to include them, hadn't requested a big family goodbye. That was his decision, his performance, his need to play the magnanimous provider. He'd ordered all that meat, the beef, the multiple pork preparations, the premium cuts that cost more per plate. She'd watched him scroll through that tablet like a kid in a candy store, selecting based solely on his preferences, never once asking what she wanted, until she'd literally had to reach for the tablet herself. And when she did order, when she requested the chicken, the shrimp, the vegetables, she'd finished everything, every single piece. She hadn't wasted anything, hadn't stuck the restaurant or him with waste charges. She'd been considerate, mindful, exactly what the restaurant's policy encouraged. She'd done nothing wrong. The realization hit her like cold water in the face. She hadn't failed some test. There was no test. There was only Marcus's need for control, his expectation that she would perform gratitude for decisions he'd made without her input, his fury that she dared to have preferences that differed from his plan, and the $200. That had nothing to do with her 3 pieces of chicken. That was the cost of his choices, his restaurant, his guest list, his meat-heavy orders, his need to impress his family, his performance of generosity that was actually about feeding his ego. The fog lifted, and for the first time all week, she saw him clearly. Marcus was still talking, his voice rising now, sensing perhaps that she'd gone too quiet, that her silence wasn't submissive agreement, but something else entirely. He was circling back to the chicken. You really fixating on it now, like those 3 pieces represented everything wrong with her, with them, with his life? She turned to look at him, really look at him, this 23-year-old retail supervisor who'd spent a week pretending to be more important than he was, who'd invited her to meet his family but spent the entire visit showing off rather than integrating her into his life, who'd just spent 15 minutes verbally abusing her over a restaurant bill that was entirely his creation. This man she'd spent 8 months dating, who apparently believed that spending money entitled him to control what she put in her body. The anger came then, not hot and explosive, but cold and clarifying. She waited for him to finish his sentence, something about how his family probably thought she had an eating disorder now, and then she spoke. Her voice was calm, eerily calm. "Turn the car around." Marcus's head snapped toward her so fast she heard his neck crack. "What?" "Turn the car around. We're going back to the restaurant." His face cycled through confusion, then hope. Maybe she was going to apologize to his family. Then suspicion. Why? She didn't answer, just repeated the instruction, her voice still carrying that unsettling calm. He argued. They were already 15 minutes away. His family had left. What was the point? Turn the car around. Something in her tone made him comply. He pulled into a parking lot, executed a sloppy 3-point turn, and headed back toward the restaurant, his hands shaking slightly on the wheel now, his confident fury replaced by something that looked a lot like nervousness. The drive back was silent except for the GPS recalculating. She could see him trying to figure out her angle, trying to predict what she was planning, probably assuming it was something that would result in him looking better, not worse. Maybe she was going to apologize. Maybe she was going to offer to pay him back for her portion. Maybe she was going to tell him he was right. He had no idea what was coming. They pulled into the restaurant parking lot. Through the windows, she could see his family still there. Apparently, they'd decided to linger over tea, milking the evening for all it was worth. Perfect. She unbuckled her seatbelt. Marcus started to get out, assuming they were going in together, but she held up a hand. "Pop the trunk." "What?" "Pop the trunk. Now." He did, his confusion deepening. She got out, walked to the back of the car, and pulled out her suitcase, the one she'd packed that morning, ready for her early flight. She set it on the pavement, extended the handle, and wheeled it to the passenger side window. Marcus rolled it down, his face pale now. "What are you doing?" She leaned down, met his eyes, and spoke with perfect clarity. "We're done." The words hung in the air between them. "You chose the restaurant I told you I didn't love. You invited 6 people I didn't ask you to include. You ordered food I specifically told you I don't eat. I ate everything I ordered and didn't waste a single thing. That $200 bill, that's on you, 100% on you." His mouth opened, closed, opened again. "You can't, we're in the middle of, you need a ride to, I'll get a ride share." She straightened up, pulled out her phone with one hand while keeping the other on her suitcase handle, and opened the app. A driver was 4 minutes away. Marcus got out of the car, coming around to her side, his voice rising now, losing the calculated control. People in the parking lot were starting to look. "You're being insane right now. Over dinner? You're going to break up with me over a fucking dinner?" "No," she said, not looking up from her phone. I'm breaking up with you because you spent 20 minutes telling me I'm ungrateful, selfish, and embarrassing after I ate a meal I didn't choose at a restaurant I didn't pick with people I didn't invite. I'm breaking up with you because you tried to force feed me food I don't eat and then got mad when I wouldn't play along. I'm breaking up with you because you think spending money means you get to control me. Her voice never rose above conversational volume, but every word landed like a hammer. That $200 wasn't a gift, it was a down payment on power, and I'm not interested. Marcus's face went through an extraordinary journey. Shock, anger, desperation, back to anger. He tried arguing, tried minimizing. It was just dinner. Why was she making such a big deal? Tried gaslighting. She was remembering wrong. He hadn't said those things, not like that. Tried bargaining. Okay, maybe he overreacted, but they could talk about this. She confirmed her rideshare pickup. Then she did the thing that would haunt him far more than the breakup itself. She walked back into the restaurant. His family was still at the table, laughing about something, their bellies full of the dinner Marcus had bankrupted himself to provide. They looked up as she approached, their faces friendly. I'm probably expecting her to say she'd forgotten something. She stopped at the edge of their table. I just wanted to say goodbye properly. I'm heading to the airport now. Marcus and I have decided to end things, so I won't be seeing you all again. Thank you for hosting me this week. The silence that fell over that table was exquisite. His mother's mouth formed a perfect O. His brothers exchanged glances. His sister's eyes went wide. His aunt, bless her, looked almost impressed. I hope you all enjoyed your dinner. Marcus was very generous to treat everyone. She turned and walked out before anyone could respond, pulling her suitcase behind her, leaving 6 people to process what had just happened and imagine what must have occurred in that car to lead to this moment. Marcus was standing by his car, frozen, and his face the color of old newspaper. She walked past him to the designated rideshare pickup spot. You can't, he started. I already did. Her driver pulled up, a blessed Hyundai sedan with a 5-star rating and a driver named Patricia, who took one look at the situation, put the suitcase in the trunk, and asked no questions. And as the car pulled away, she watched through the rear window as Marcus stood alone in that parking lot, his family emerging from the restaurant behind him, their faces full of questions he'd have to answer, knowing he'd spent $200 to look generous and ended up looking like exactly what he was. Small. She made her flight, sat in the airport terminal for 3 hours, her phone blowing up with texts she didn't read, her mind quiet for the first time in a week. The rideshare had cost $43, worth every penny. By the time she landed at home, Marcus had sent 17 texts and called 4 times. She blocked his number before even leaving the airport, blocked him on every platform, every app, every possible avenue of contact. Within 24 hours, mutual friends started reaching out. Marcus had apparently crafted quite the story. She'd had some kind of breakdown. She'd dumped him over nothing. She'd embarrassed him in front of his family. He was the victim, confused and hurt, just trying to understand what he'd done wrong. She sent one message to the group chat. He knows what he did. I'm good. Please don't make this a thing. And then she muted it. 3 days later, one of his brothers reached out through Instagram. The message was brief. Hey, so we got Marcus's version of what happened, but his story doesn't really make sense. And you seemed cool all week. Just wanted to say sorry if he did something messed up. She appreciated that, but didn't respond. It wasn't her job to educate his family about who he really was. 2 weeks later, through the grapevine that never fully dies in your 20s, she heard that Marcus had tried apologizing, had sent a long email to a mutual friend asking them to forward it to her. The email was apparently 3 paragraphs about how the stress of the bill had made him come across wrong and how he hoped they could talk through the misunderstanding. Not once, according to her friend, did he acknowledge what he'd actually said. Not once did he admit that trying to force someone to eat food they don't want is controlling. Not once did he seem to understand that the $200 was irrelevant. It was about power, about control, but about the assumption that generosity came with strings attached. The email went unanswered. Her friend asked if she was okay, if she needed to talk about it. She said she was fine, and she meant it. Because here's what Marcus never understood. That dinner wasn't about chicken or pork or beef or a $200 bill. It was about the moment someone shows you who they really are when they think you're trapped, financially, socially, emotionally. When they think you're invested enough to accept disrespect. When they think a week-long visit and a pricey dinner have bought them the right to berate you, to control what you eat, to make their ego more important than your autonomy. That dinner was about recognizing that moment for what it was, and walking away. She never regretted leaving him in that parking lot, never second-guessed the decision, never wished she'd handled it differently. Because she'd learned something valuable at that Korean BBQ restaurant, something worth far more than $200. You can't put a price on self-respect. But you can definitely tell when someone's trying to buy it on credit, and you can refuse to be the one who pays it back. 6 months later, she heard through the same grapevine that Marcus was dating someone new, someone who apparently loved Korean BBQ and never complained about his restaurant choices. She hoped, genuinely, that he'd learned something, but she suspected he'd just found someone willing to eat the pork, and she was perfectly fine not being that person anymore. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt that knot in your stomach when someone tried to make their generosity feel like ownership, or if you've ever walked away from someone who mistook your kindness for weakness, then you're part of a community that understands something powerful. Your boundaries aren't negotiable, no matter how much someone claims they spent on dinner. Hit that subscribe button if you believe that self-respect isn't selfish, it's survival. And drop a like if you think more people need to hear stories like this, because somewhere right now, someone's sitting at a table wondering if they're overreacting, and they need to know they're not. You're not. And you never were.